KO. KO. You lose. Continue. 8, 7, 6.
Walk out the door, you see someone that you know and they ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Greetings fellow Earthlings, it's the 8-Bit Academic here. In today's episode I will be covering a slightly controversial topic which might end up making me a target of the cult of Bruce Lee. If you don't hear anything from me within the next 2 weeks or so, just know that they probably sent the highly skilled martial arts grandmaster, George Dillman, after me, who proceeded to assassinate me by using a chi-powered death touch that made my nutsack explode.
Without a doubt, George Dillman is a force to be reckoned with. He's a 9th degree black belt who has taught everyone from Muhammad Ali to Bruce Lee. Dillman claims to have adapted this technique to where he can knock a person out without having to touch them.
Use chi energy out of this hand, and we're going to affect up on the head at the third eye. So snap, couple. Back.
Anyway, all jokes aside though, the gameplay footage I've provided here are once again clips of me playing Tekken 2 with one of my favorite characters, Martial Law. Though if you expected to see any skill from me, then I'm sorry to inform you that Tekken 2's janky gameplay prevented me from displaying my true abilities, and you will have to wait until I play and record my Tekken 3 Law gameplay to see me at my full power. I am totally telling the truth and not trying to make excuses for my complete lack of skill at fighting games. Anyway, for those who haven't watched my previous video which included Tekken 2 gameplay, linked in the description below, Tekken 2 was a 3D fighting game developed by Namco and released in 1995 for arcades and 1996 for the PlayStation 1 or PSX. Go watch that other video because I'm not going to repeat myself. As mentioned before, the topic of today's video is a tad bit of a controversial one because despite being 100% true and based on actual evidence, it tends to drive a lot of Bruce Lee fanatics crazy. But don't get me wrong, I am in no way attempting to disrespect the man's legacy. I myself grew up on Bruce Lee films and am a huge fan and a great admirer of his to this very day. But unfortunately, sometimes we have to recognize and acknowledge that even our greatest heroes are but human beings like the rest of us and are also capable of having flaws and vices. Even a small-time content creator like myself is sometimes swayed by certain vices. Anyway, despite being one of the most famous martial arts superstars in the world and having achieved a status of fame that would leave him forever immortalized in the annals of both entertainment and martial arts history, even long after his sudden and tragic death, to the point of even being the subject of heated arguments and debates in comment sections and online forums with anything related to martial arts. One would be surprised to learn that the Great Dragon himself had a bit of a destructive relationship with drugs, which may have been the reason for his tragic and sudden death at the age of just 32 years. But before we get into the hot tabloid gossip aspect, let's talk a little bit about the man and the legend himself. Bruce Lee was born with the name Lee Jun Fan in the year 1940 in San Francisco in the United States, but would end up spending much of his early years being raised by his parents in the then British colony of Hong Kong, together with his 4 siblings. He would go on to have a very short career as a child actor, appearing in a handful of black and white films thanks to his father Li Hui Chun, who was a famous Chinese opera singer and stage actor at the time. After getting into a few street scraps as a delinquent teen, he would end up learning Wing Chun Kung Fu from the famed Grand Master Yip Man, whose legacy the Chinese film industry as a whole seemed to be milking to death at this point, as they attempt to turn him into their own version of Captain America. Captain China, if you will.
天上太阳红呀红彤彤哎，心中的太阳是毛泽东哎，他领导我们的解放哎，人民翻身当家做主人，咿呀咿自由呀呀自由啊，人民翻身当家做主人。
I like China. I sell apartment for I just sold an apartment for $15 million to somebody from China.
Anyway, after getting into yet another fight that could have seen him face jail time, Bruce's parents sent him to the United States in 1959, with him eventually enrolling in the University of Washington in 1961. It was at this time that a young Bruce Lee would start teaching martial arts as a way to earn an income, completely wrecking a challenger by the name of Wang Jackman, coming up with his own martial arts philosophy called Jeet Kune Do, or the way of the intercepting fist, and eventually finding his way into the fourth circle of hell known as greed. I mean Hollywood. He found his way to Hollywood. Yeah, that's totally what I meant to say.
And it goes like this. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try.
No hell below us.
Above us only sky.
Imagine all the people
living for today.
Heresy!
His roles in America, including playing Kato in The Green Hornet, introduced him to American audiences, but the cultural frictions that existed did not allow Lee to fully express himself. This was after all the 1960s and the height of the civil rights movement, as well as tensions between Eastern and Western nations thanks to the Cold War and also the American involvement in the Vietnam War. He would also have minor roles in shows like Longstreet and in a film called Marlowe.
Okay.
After returning to Hong Kong in 1971, Lee landed his first leading role in The Big Boss, directed by Lo Wei. A year later, he starred in Fist of Fury, in which he portrayed the famous Chinese folk hero Chen Zhen, and The Way of the Dragon, directed and written by Lee himself. He went on to star in the US-Hong Kong co-production Enter the Dragon and The Game of Death. However, he died both before Enter the Dragon's final release and before he could even finish filming Game of Death. His Hong Kong and Hollywood produced films, all of which were commercially successful, elevated Hong Kong martial arts films to a new level of popularity and international acclaim, sparking a surge of Western interest in the Chinese martial arts. the direction and tone of his films, including their fight choreography and diversification, dramatically influenced and changed martial arts and the martial arts films worldwide. Sadly, Bruce's skyrocketing career would end in the year 1973, as mentioned earlier, before the release of Enter the Dragon, with his sudden death by brain edema at the age of 32. This left many of his fans around the world shattered and left a hole in the Hong Kong film industry, which some greedy film producers and directors tried to fill by attempting to find the next Bruce Lee, which led to an entire genre of films which became known as Bruceploitation, another topic for a future video. With his tragic death, however, came many wild speculations and rumors of how such a seemingly fit and healthy individual could die at such a young age, ranging from him being murdered by the triads, also known as the Chinese mafia, him having overtrained himself and never allowing his body to rest, and him being haunted by a Chinese demon that took his life, when in reality it turns out, after 48 years, we finally received the answer in the year 2021 regarding the possible cause of his death. The thing that most likely killed Bruce Lee was drugs.
Steven, what are you doing in there?
Drugs.
In the year 2021, a handful of private letters surfaced that were written by Bruce to one of his close friends at the time, a man by the name of Robert Baker, aka Bob Baker, who could be seen as playing the main villain's henchman in the movie Fist of Fury, also known as The Chinese Connection, which was released in 1972. It turns out that much of the contents of these letters were in fact requests from Bruce asking Baker for a fairly sizable supply of cocaine, psilocybin mushrooms, LSD and cannabis over the course of several years from 1967 to 1973 before his death.
Drugs.
No, we're okay.
Drugs.
This is awkward. No, thank you.
Drugs.
Who invited?
This was the period when the martial arts action star became a household name. These letters span the most important era in Lee's development as an actor, since they contain references to his work in all his films like The Big Boss, Way of the Dragon, Fist of Fury, Enter the Dragon, and even the film he was never able to complete, which I mentioned earlier, called The Game of Death, since he died before even being able to finish it. The cut that was eventually released in 1978 by Warner Brothers starred a bunch of stunt doubles in makeup in an attempt to make them look like Bruce Lee. The collection of more than 40 letters were verified by Professional Sports Authenticator, a leading authenticator of celebrity autographs. Initially, letters to Baker included code words referring to the drugs Lee sought, such as requesting Fine C and Coca-Cola. That one's kind of funny, since Coca-Cola at one point did contain small amounts of cocaine in it. That's actually hilarious. Forgive me.
Are you still a coke addict?
Yes, yeah, but down one a week.
One a week?
One a week, so I'm restrained.
But a proper coke, not a diet one?
And I have this special thing for a particular type of coke, which is in the fridge somewhere.
But eventually Bruce would start requesting for his supply of drugs quite bluntly. In a letter dated late 1972, Lee wrote to Baker for cocaine and implied it would help him in developing a character for an upcoming movie, saying, "Stoned as hell, but I am working on an upcoming character," he wrote. "Some coke would help in the formation of what I want to create."
You on drugs or alcohol?
No, sir.
You take drugs or alcohol?
What is drugs?
Eventually, however, Bruce seemingly began to realize that regular drug use was taking a toll on his health and his life in general, since in another letter in 1970, he wrote, "I told Linda to call you to forget about the stuff, because I don't really need them in my training. I feel that I have gained in trying them, but excessive indulgence of them just isn't my road in Jeet Kune Do. Sadly, however, the dragon would never fully be able to kick his habit, since weeks before his death in 1973, his wife Linda also wrote Baker saying, "Don't worry about Bruce using the C. He is not going overboard," clearly stating that to some degree, right up until his death, Bruce Lee was still hooked. In July of that same year, Bruce Lee experienced a minor headache after taking Equagesic, a prescription painkiller given to him by his then mistress Betty Ting. While at her apartment in Hong Kong, Lee slipped into a coma and never woke up. It was determined at the time that the cause of the 32-year-old actor's death was a reaction to an ingredient in the pain medication he took, which caused him to suffer from a cerebral edema, or swelling on the brain. But since the discovery of his drug request letters to Bob Baker, many now believe that perhaps his regular and excessive use of cocaine as well as other drugs may have also contributed somewhat to his death. In an article in the December 2022 issue of Clinical Kidney Journal, a team of researchers examined the various theories regarding Lee's cause of death and concluded that his fatal cerebral edema was brought on by hyponatremia, an insufficient concentration of sodium in the blood. The authors noted that several risk factors predisposed Lee to hyponatremia, including excessive water intake, insufficient solute intake, alcohol consumption, and use or overuse of multiple drugs, which impair the ability of the kidneys to excrete excess fluids. Lee's symptoms before his death were also found to closely match known cases of fatal hyponatremia. The letters themselves were supposedly rediscovered by Robert Baker's daughter, who put them up for auction in 2021. Robert Baker, who was both Bruce's friend and his main supplier, is also said to have felt a deep sense of guilt over Bruce Lee's death in 1973 and had blamed himself for it for the rest of his life, finally passing away in the year 1993. Despite the reveal of these letters, however, the Lee family estate have yet to address the revelations contained within them, but from my own personal point of view, despite having what seems like a pretty severe drug addiction, which may have contributed in some way to his death, I don't think it should take away from his legacy, since I for one am a believer in separating the art from the artist, and if anything, it should serve more as a lesson to anyone that even if someone is a celebrity or occupies some position in the upper echelons of society, or if they have some degree of fame, at the end of the day, they're still human beings and deeply flawed like the rest of us. Bruce Lee, in my opinion, is one of the most famous and influential individuals of the 20th century. His philosophies and his creativity when it came to both filmmaking and martial arts have left a lasting impact on the world. Many athletes, professional fighters, and action stars cite Bruce Lee as their inspiration, and not to mention that he completely changed the way fight scenes are filmed in action movies, going from this to this. which eventually led to epicness like this. So one can clearly see the trajectory that fight scenes and action films took thanks to Bruce Lee. As well as Bruce being considered as the godfather of MMA. Yes, I know that mixed martial arts existed before Bruce Lee, such as Vale Tudo in Brazil and Russian Sambo. And there's also the famous judoka Jean LaBelle, who was a friend of Bruce that participated in the world's first ever mixed martial arts fight against a boxer named Milo Savage in 1963. But one cannot deny that it was Bruce Lee's hot takes, ideas and philosophies regarding the rigidity of traditional martial arts and his attempt at countering it with his personal mantra of Jeet Kune Do, which he also promoted in his films, that made this idea of mixing the best of various hand-to-hand combat styles together become popular. So yes, while he may have been a bit of a stoner in his lifetime, we also have to recognize that if it wasn't for Bruce Lee, I don't think martial arts would have become as popular as it has in this day and age. Also, just a side note, it is kind of very much expected that he would have ended up using drugs anyway. I mean, they didn't call it the swingin' 60s for nothing, and they did swing right up until the mid-1970s. Pretty much everyone was using drugs in one way or another, from the counterculture movement to the free love hippie movement, musical events like Woodstock, where drug distribution was commonplace, celebrities like Jimi Hendrix, and even members of the Beatles. It's not hard to imagine that when Bruce started to make a name for himself in the entertainment industry, both in the States and in Hong Kong, he would end up participating in the same drug-fueled lifestyle as everyone else. Drugs and show business often tend to go hand in hand, where even action stars like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren admitted to having developed a bit of a cocaine habit during their time in Hollywood. And I mean, even soldiers fighting in the Vietnam War at the time were also flying high as a kite while trying to avoid the never-ending barrage of enemy bullets. Drug use was extremely commonplace around that time, so much so that even Elmo from Sesame Street ended up as a bit of a snorter.
Jump, 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 jump.
Elmo, how was that? How do you feel?
Elmo feels kind of fantastic!
I give a damn about reputation. Living in the past, it's a new generation. You do what you want to do, but that's what I'm gonna do.
Oh my god, is that Elmo?
So in the end, Bruce, just like literally everyone else in the 60s and 70s, was simply a product of his time. It's just a shame that it resulted in him struggling with those little demons until his death in 1973. But regardless, as mentioned earlier, one cannot deny the lasting impact he had on the world. I have yet to meet a person who has not heard the name Bruce Lee. Even my younger cousins who have never even watched any of his films know of who he is, or at least have heard the name. Despite his flaws and his short time on this earth, his influence was so great that he has essentially become immortalized as the great dragon of martial arts cinema. That's it for this episode of the 8-Bit Academic. Why not comment what your favorite Bruce Lee film is down below? Mine is definitely Fist of Fury. A lot of people say Enter the Dragon, but for me, Fist of Fury is peak Bruce Lee. Everything about that film, from the story to the fight scenes, is just top quality. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth the watch. Also, shout out to the Kung Fu Genius podcast on YouTube as well, who served as the inspiration for this episode and who has also covered the Bruce Lee drug letters in far greater detail than I have here. I've linked to his video on the topic in the description. Anyway, I'll catch up with you all next time. Peace.
KO. KO.
Can I laugh in your face?